The US Postal Service has been in the news for the wrong reasons these days, but stepping aside from the mail in voting issues, let me offer a perspective on the US Postal Service. An organization that I've studied at some length. So if you go through their website, you'll find there's a lot of interesting stuff. They have a very wide product and services portfolio that encompasses things like last mile delivery, which is the hardest part in logistics, distribution, communications. They also do payments, so financial services, advertising, all those catalogs that we receive, retail. So it's essentially a channel, it's a network. And the emphasis is really on two things: low cost and reliability. As a government organization, it has a pretty complex regulatory structure. In the 1970s, they had this Postal Reorganization Act. So it covers a lot of things. The revenue should cover costs. It has a break-even mandate. There's an 18-month rate resetting process. There's a lot of congressional interference. All decisions have to go through binding arbitration, and it's governed by a presidentially appointed board. And there are so many organizations that are supposed to offer oversight. It's a complete mishmash between the Congress, the Government Accountability Office, the OMB. So think of it as a business, but it's something that's governed by federal rules. And I think that model is largely unsustainable in today's environment. So they've had a lot of challenges, and the media has been quick to pick up on those. There's been a lot of decline in volume. There's been a growth in mail volume that has been picked up by competitor types that didn't exist 20 years ago. There's a lot of diversion from this electronic delivery systems that have come on board. So there's a lot of domestic competition, but of course increasingly a lot of foreign competition too. And meanwhile, the agency has had a lot of increasing cost burdens, and labor costs is really the bulk of its operating expenses. And many of these old organizations, they have a lot of retirement liability costs that are rising. And it's governed by federal workers' compensation rules. So these fixed costs are almost 50-60% of annual costs, and these are not going to go away in a hurry. So they have a huge infrastructure. They own lots and lots of real estate, and now they are facing technology competition. The president has been asking them to increase rates, to improve productivity, and I guess the new Postmaster General is tasked with these mandates, but I don't think any of these is going to be enough to close the gap between where the USPS is today and where it's going to go. But of course, certainly they need major improvements in service, in product extension, and so many other enhancements that have come after the advent of e-delivery. So what are the options that the USPS has? Well, they can continue as a government agency, and they have this universal service obligation that is defined by the government. And they're going to have significant volume declines, at least at the price that they're charging right now. And because they've been so much in the news, one would expect a lot more oversight and progressively even more restrictions. They have a very limited product offering, and as I just said, very little direct control over labor cost. So there's really no way out but to increase the cost per piece of items that they deliver to arrive at much higher relative rates. But that's something that's going to be deeply unpalatable to the general public. So that it's taxpayer funded through government appropriations, and there's very little chance of it breaking even or even having moderate losses with some subsidy. The second option, which is absolute no-go, is privatize the United States Postal Service. And that might mean no guaranteed universal service obligation. So that's not going to go anywhere. That will mean no congressional oversight. There's going to be lots of issues about governance, private sector freedoms. But that will give it the remit to come into the 21st century, to expand their product offerings, to bring in market-based pricing, to have more direct control over labor costs. And of course, if they're privatized, it's all going to be about maximizing shareholder value with the profit motive. So I don't think that's going to go down too well. And the third option is, of course, a commercial government enterprise that retains its universal service responsibility, but it should come with more flexibility, less oversight, be nimble, have more opportunities for growth, for cost containment, to have the ability to expand its product offerings, to have more control over labor costs, to have lower cost per piece, and essentially to add newer sources of revenue, so that it's able to generate net income for its owner, and its owner is all of us, the government, so that it's able to have at least some semblance of moderate retained earnings to fund much needed capital investments. But this ain't going to be easy, because if you pick up the New York Times, and every day there's an article on it, there'll be a lot of congressional lobbying by competitors, by special interest groups. There's a lot of partisan politics that's around between the Dems and the Republicans. Meanwhile, organizations such as the Usps are very politically risk averse. And the entire corporate culture is that of risk aversion. And meanwhile, we who use the USPS, most of us really don't know what their mandate is. So it has a very unenlightened consumer set. And all of us have a certain sense of entitlement that, hey, what do you mean? So the next steps are going to be very messy. But regardless of any fundamental reform that the new Postmaster General is perhaps tasked with, or the formation of a commission as some have suggested, this transformation needs to continue, and they will need to implement politically sensitive strategies. They'll need to involve many more industry stakeholders than they have traditionally done to develop innovative new products, to increase their services. And of course, they need to educate the American public about the fantastic service that we've been receiving for the last 100 years plus. So they need to, I think, focus on what is in their control, service, performance, costs, I'm not too sure, but yes, to improve accountability, to reduce red tape, to improve accessibility, to articulate a new vision, and begin to implement a culture of change. And the other thing is, I wish they would get rid of their huge real estate portfolio. So on the Active Allocator blog, I've provided some insight into how these guys could, if they wish, rationalize some of those real estate assets that they've been hanging on to and get out of the real estate business. I thought I would just speak my mind today. Thank you so much for listening in. Bye-bye.